The rain drummed against the large windows of the Literary Haven bookstore like impatient fingers tapping on glass. Inside, warm golden light spilled across rows of colorful spines, creating a sanctuary of stories that beckoned to anyone who passed by. But outside, pressed against the cold window with her breath fogging the glass, stood 14-year-old Zelphina Castillo, her dark eyes drinking in the sight of books she could never afford. Her worn sneakers had holes that let in the October chill, and her faded jacket hung loose on her thin frame. But her eyes, those deep brown eyes, sparkled with an intelligence that no amount of poverty could dim. Every day after school, she made this pilgrimage to the bookstore, standing outside like a pilgrim at a holy shrine, watching people come and go with their precious packages of bound paper and dreams. The other kids from her school rushed past, earbuds in, phones glowing, heading home to warm dinners and homework help. But Zelphina had nowhere urgent to be. Home was a cramped one-bedroom apartment where her grandmother Abuela Rosa lay coughing in the only bed, fighting a respiratory illness that seemed to get worse each winter. The medical bills piled up like autumn leaves, and every dollar Zelphina earned from her part-time cleaning job at the diner went toward medicine and rent. And they went toward medicine and rent. What she didn't know was that this ordinary Tuesday would change everything. What she couldn't see was that someone had been watching her daily ritual, someone who understood the hunger in her eyes, because she had once felt it herself. Mr. Chen, the bookstore owner, had noticed Zelphina months ago. At first, he'd thought she might be planning to shoplift, but he quickly realized she never even attempted to enter the store. She just stood there, reading the titles in the window display, her lips moving silently as if she were memorizing every word. Sometimes she'd pull out a crumpled notebook and write something down, perhaps the name of a book she hoped to find at the library someday. But the library had closed 6 months ago due to budget cuts, taking with it Zelphina's only gateway to the world she craved. Now the bookstore window was her only connection to the stories that lived beyond her reach, stories that called to her like distant music she could hear but never quite touch. The bookstore itself was a marvel of organized chaos. Tall shelves stretched toward the ceiling, loaded with everything from classic literature to contemporary fiction, from poetry collections to science texts. Reading nooks with soft armchairs invited customers to lose themselves for hours, while the scent of coffee from the small cafe in the corner mixed with the vanilla and paper smell of new books. It was everything Zelphina dreamed of, a palace of possibility where every book held the potential to transport her somewhere else, someone else. But standing outside in the rain, shivering in her thin jacket, she felt like a character from one of Dickens' novels, pressing her nose against the glass of a bakery she could never enter. She'd read Oliver Twist 3 times when the library was still open, and sometimes she felt like Oliver himself, always asking for more when there was so little to go around. The internal war raged in her chest every single day. Part of her wanted to save every penny for just one book, one story to call her own. But every time she counted the crumpled bills in her pocket, she heard Abuela Rosa's labored breathing, and knew the money had to go toward medicine. Her grandmother had sacrificed everything to raise her, after her parents died in a car accident when she was 7. Now it was Zelphina's turn to be the caregiver, even if it meant her own dreams had to wait. As the rain intensified, most pedestrians hurried past with umbrellas and hurried steps, but one figure moved differently, slowly, deliberately, as if the weather were merely an inconvenience rather than a force to be battled. Evangeline Blackwood was 73 years old, with silver hair that caught the light like spun moonbeams and eyes the color of winter sky. She wore a vintage wool coat that had seen decades of wear but still held its elegant lines, and she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars. For 3 weeks, Evangeline had been watching Zelphina's daily vigil. She'd seen the girl's face light up when new books appeared in the window display, witnessed her disappointment when the rain forced her to leave earlier than usual, and noticed how she sometimes traced the titles in the air with her finger, as if trying to absorb their essence through the glass. Evangeline understood that hunger. 60 years ago she had been that girl. Different circumstances, different city, but the same desperate love for stories, the same feeling of being locked out of a world she desperately wanted to enter. She had been 12 years old, living with her aunt in a tenement building in Chicago, when a teacher named Mrs. Patterson had changed her life with a single act of kindness. Now, as she watched Zelphina huddle against the bookstore window, Evangeline felt the familiar tug of recognition. This was what she had been waiting for, what she had been preparing for during all those years of teaching, saving, and planning. The foundation she had established 5 years ago had helped dozens of young people, but she had never found someone who reminded her so completely of herself. The rain was coming down harder now, and Zelphina's thin jacket was soaked through. Her notebook was getting wet, the pages where she wrote down book titles starting to run with blue ink. But she didn't move. She stood there like a sentinel, guarding her connection to the stories inside. Unwilling to break the spell, even as the cold seeped into her bones. That's when Evangeline made her decision. She approached slowly, her footsteps quiet on the wet pavement. "Quite a storm we're having," she said softly, coming to stand beside Zelphina at the window. Zelphina startled, stepping back instinctively. She'd learned to be wary of strangers, especially ones who approached her when she was alone. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she said quickly, her voice defensive. "I'm just looking." "I know," Evangeline said, her voice gentle as rainfall. "I've been watching you look for weeks now. You have excellent taste in books." She gestured toward the window display where new releases sat alongside classic titles. "That one there? The House on Mango Street. It's a beautiful story about a young girl finding her voice through writing." Zelphina's eyes widened. "You've read it?" "Many times. It's about dreams and identity, about the power of words to transform lives. Very much like another book I love, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn." Evangeline smiled. "Have you read that one?" "At the library before it closed," Zelphina said, then caught herself. She didn't usually share personal information with strangers, but something about this woman's voice made her want to trust her. "I read everything I could before they shut it down, and now you come here instead." It wasn't a question, but Zelphina nodded anyway. "I know I can't buy anything. I like to see what's new. Sometimes I can read the first few pages through the window if the book is open to the right page." Evangeline's heart clenched. She remembered that feeling, the desperation for stories, the creative ways of finding scraps of narrative when whole books were out of reach. "What kind of stories do you love most?" "All of them," Zelphina said without hesitation. "But especially the ones about people who overcome things. People who start with nothing and find a way to make something of themselves. Like Jane Eyre, or Anne of Green Gables, or—" She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious. "Or like you," Evangeline said softly. Zelphina's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you're living your own story right now. Standing out here in the rain, hungry for books, dreaming of different worlds. That's the beginning of every great story, about someone who rises above their circumstances." The rain was getting heavier, and Evangeline pulled a small umbrella from her purse. Without asking, she held it over both of them, creating a tiny island of dryness in the storm. "I want to tell you something," she said. "When I was 12 years old, I was a lot like you. I lived with my aunt in a tiny apartment, and books were the only thing that made me feel like life could be bigger than our cramped rooms and empty refrigerator." Zelphina studied her face, searching for signs of deception. Adults sometimes told stories about their past to make children feel better, but there was something in Evangeline's eyes that looked genuinely remembered, genuinely felt. "I used to walk past a bookstore every day on my way to school," Evangeline continued. "I'd press my face against the window just like you do, memorizing the covers, making up stories about the stories inside. I thought I'd never be able to afford a book of my own. But then my teacher, Mrs. Patterson, noticed me. She saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. What did she do? She took me to that bookstore and bought me my first book, Little Women. And she told me that she was investing in my future, that someday I would do the same for someone else. Evangeline reached into her purse and pulled out a small golden card, no bigger than a credit card, with elegant script etched into its surface. "This is for you." Zelphina stared at the card but didn't take it. "What is it?" "It's a lifetime reading membership. This card gives you access to any book in this store, anytime you want. You can read here, or take books home, or both. It's yours, no strings attached." "I can't accept this." Zelphina's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't have any money to pay you back." "You don't need money, you need books. And the world needs people like you. People who love stories enough to stand in the rain for them." Evangeline held out the card again. "This isn't charity, Zelphina. It's an investment." "How do you know my name?" "I asked around. I make it my business to know about remarkable young people in this neighborhood." Evangeline smiled. "I'm Evangeline Blackwood, and I run a foundation that helps gifted students access educational resources. I've been retired from teaching for 10 years, but I still recognize potential when I see it." Zelphina's hands shook as she stared at the golden card. It seemed too good to be true, too perfect to be real. "There has to be a catch. The only catch is that you have to use it. You have to read and learn and grow. And someday, when you're successful and established, you help someone else the way I'm helping you now. But I don't even know if I'm smart enough for college or anything like that. I'm just a girl who cleans tables at a diner." Jane Eyre was just an orphan. Anne Shirley was just a foundling. Maya Angelou was just a girl who stopped speaking for 5 years. All the heroines you love were just something before they became extraordinary. Evangeline pressed the card into Zelphina's reluctant hands. "The only difference between you and them is that you're real, and your story is still being written." Zelphina felt tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "My grandmother is sick. I use all my money for her medicine. I can't afford to think about the future, when I'm not even sure about tomorrow." "The card comes with more than just books," Evangeline said gently. "There's a mentorship program, tutoring services, and a small scholarship fund for students who show exceptional promise. We can help with your grandmother's medical expenses while you focus on your education." "Why?" Zelphina's voice broke. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because you're not a stranger. You're the girl I used to be, and you're the future I want to help create. Because 60 years ago someone believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Because stories have the power to change lives. And you deserve to have all the stories you can read." Zelphina looked down at the golden card in her hands. It was warm, as if it had been waiting for her touch. The script was elegant, reading, "Literary Haven Lifetime Membership," with her name engraved at the bottom. She had never owned anything so beautiful, so full of possibility. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Evangeline said with a smile. "Thank me when you write your first story, or graduate from college, or change someone else's life, the way I hope this changes yours." The rain began to lighten, and the bookstore's warm glow seemed to pulse with invitation. Mr. Chen appeared at the window, having noticed the two figures huddled outside. When he saw the golden card in Zelphina's hands, his face broke into a knowing smile. He unlocked the door and gestured for them to come inside. "Welcome to the Literary Haven," he said to Zelphina as she stepped across the threshold for the first time. "I've been wondering when you'd finally come in." The warmth hit her like an embrace, and the smell of books and coffee filled her senses. She felt like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole, except this wonderland was real, and she was allowed to stay. Evangeline guided her to the young adult section, where dozens of stories waited to be discovered. "Start anywhere," Evangeline said. "Read everything. Let yourself be hungry for stories, because that hunger is what will drive you to create stories of your own." Over the next few months, Zelphina's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. She spent every free moment in the bookstore, devouring novels and poetry, biography and science fiction. Her grades, which had been suffering due to her work schedule and lack of resources, began to climb steadily. Teachers noticed her increased participation in class discussions and the sophistication of her writing assignments. The scholarship fund Evangeline had mentioned proved to be more comprehensive than Zelphina had dared hope. It covered not just books and tutoring, but also helped with Abuela Rosa's medical expenses, allowing Zelphina to reduce her hours at the diner and focus on her studies. Her grandmother's health stabilized with better medical care, and for the first time in years, their tiny apartment felt like a home, rather than a place where they were merely surviving. But the most profound change was in Zelphina herself. The girl who had once hidden in the shadows, afraid to dream too big, began to discover her own voice. She started writing in earnest, not just homework assignments, but stories and poems that flowed from her heart onto the page. She wrote about a girl who found magic in books, about a grandmother whose love transcended illness, about the power of strangers to change lives with a single act of kindness. Mr. Chen offered her a part-time job at the bookstore, shelving books and helping customers find their next great read. She loved recommending stories to other young people, seeing their faces light up the way hers had when she first discovered a book that spoke to her soul. She began tutoring younger children in reading, sharing her passion for stories with kids who reminded her of herself. The confidence that had been buried under years of poverty and worry began to emerge. She started speaking up in class, joining the school newspaper, and even auditioned for the drama club. Each book she read added another layer to her understanding of the world and her place in it. She read about injustice and became passionate about social issues. She read about adventure and began planning her own journeys. She read about love and began to believe that she deserved it. Evangeline visited the bookstore regularly, always with a new book recommendation or a story about another young person her foundation had helped. She became not just a benefactor but a mentor, guide, and friend. They would sit in the bookstore's reading corner, discussing everything from Shakespeare to contemporary poetry, from college applications to career dreams. "You're not the same girl who stood outside in the rain," Evangeline observed one afternoon, watching Zelphina lead a book club discussion for middle school students. "No," Zelphina agreed. "But I'm still her, too. I carry her with me. That hunger, that gratitude, it keeps me grounded." "Good. Never lose that. The best stories come from people who remember what it felt like to be on the outside looking in." As junior year approached, Zelphina's English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, pulled her aside after class. "I've been reviewing applications for the state's Young Writers Scholarship Program," she said. "I think you should apply." "Me?" Zelphina's voice squeaked with surprise. "But that's for really talented writers. I'm just getting started." "You're exactly the kind of writer they're looking for. Someone with a unique voice, a compelling story, and the skill to tell it beautifully. Your essay about the golden card moved me to tears." The scholarship competition required a portfolio of original writing and a personal essay about overcoming obstacles. Zelphina spent weeks crafting her submission, pouring her heart onto the page. She wrote about poverty and dreams, about the hunger for stories, and the power of believing in someone else's potential. She wrote about Abuela Rosa's strength and Evangeline's kindness, about discovering that she had a voice worth sharing. When the acceptance letter arrived, Zelphina stared at it for a full minute before the words sank in. Full scholarship to the State University's Creative Writing Program, with a mentorship component and guaranteed internship opportunities. She ran all the way to the bookstore, tears streaming down her face, clutching the letter like a winning lottery ticket. Evangeline was waiting in their usual corner, as if she had known this moment would come. "I'm so proud of you," she said, pulling Zelphina into a fierce hug. "But not surprised. I knew from the moment I saw you that you were destined for great things. None of this would have happened without you," Zelphina said, "without that golden card, without your belief in me. I was just a girl standing outside in the rain." "No," Evangeline said firmly. You were a girl with dreams bigger than her circumstances. The card just gave you access to the tools you needed to build those dreams into reality. The courage, the intelligence, the determination, those were always yours. 1 year later, Zelphina stood outside the literary haven once again, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood 10-year-old Marcus, a boy she'd noticed walking past the bookstore every day after school, his face pressed against the window just as hers had been. She'd learned his story. Another child raising himself while his mother worked multiple jobs, another bright mind hungry for stories but unable to afford them. "Are you sure this is for me?" Marcus asked, staring at the golden card in his hands with the same disbelief Zelphina had felt. "I'm sure," she said, remembering Evangeline's words, "but it's not just for you. It's for all the stories you'll read, all the dreams you'll dream, and all the people you'll help someday when you're older." Evangeline watched from inside the bookstore, her winter sky eyes bright with unshed tears. She had seen this moment coming, had known that Zelphina would understand what it meant to pass the gift forward. The circle was complete, but it was also beginning again. The beautiful thing about stories, Evangeline had once told her, is that they never really end. They just pass from one person to another, growing and changing, touching new lives and creating new possibilities. As Marcus pushed open the bookstore door for the first time, his face glowing with wonder, Zelphina felt the truth of those words in her bones. She was no longer the girl standing outside in the rain, but she would always carry that girl's hunger, that girl's dreams, that girl's gratitude for the stranger who saw her potential and gave her the key to unlock it. The rain had stopped, and the bookstore's warm light spilled out onto the sidewalk, inviting anyone who passed to come in and discover their own story. Inside, shelves full of books waited to transport readers to new worlds, to show them new possibilities, to remind them that their own stories were still being written. Sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simplest acts of kindness. A stranger's golden card, a moment of recognition, a belief in someone else's potential. These small gestures ripple outward like stones thrown into still water, creating waves that can change the world, one story at a time. And somewhere in the city, another child stands outside another bookstore, face pressed against the glass, dreaming of stories just beyond reach. But now they're not alone. Now there are people like Zelphina, people who remember what it felt like to be hungry for stories, who understand that the greatest gift you can give someone is the belief that their story matters, that their dreams are worth pursuing, that they have the power to write their own ending. In a world that often feels divided and disconnected, stories remain our common language, our shared humanity. They remind us that we all have the capacity to be heroes in our own lives and in the lives of others. They teach us that transformation is possible, that kindness matters, that sometimes the most powerful magic is simply seeing someone else's potential and helping them see it too. The golden card continues to pass from hand to hand, from dreamer to dreamer, carrying with it the promise that stories have the power to change lives, that education is the key to breaking cycles of poverty, and that we all have the responsibility to help others climb the same mountains we've conquered. The next time you see someone standing outside looking in, remember Zelphina's story. Remember that sometimes all it takes is one person believing in another's potential to create a ripple effect that changes everything. Be that person. Be the one who hands out golden cards, who opens doors, who says, yes, you belong here too. Your story is still being written. Someone else's story is waiting for you to help write it. And in the end, that's what makes life worth living. Not just the stories we read, but the stories we help others discover, the dreams we help others achieve, the doors we help others open. The bookstore stays open late into the evening, its windows glowing like beacons in the darkness, calling to anyone who needs a story, anyone who needs to believe that their life can be different, anyone who needs to remember that they are the author of their own destiny. The golden card gleams in the lamplight, waiting for the next worthy dreamer to claim it. And the story continues, one reader at a time, one dream at a time, one golden card at a time. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of kindness and the importance of believing in others' potential, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about a time someone believed in you, or tell us about a book that changed your life. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that celebrate the extraordinary in the ordinary, the magic in the mundane, and the power we all have to change someone else's world. Because every story matters, every dream deserves a chance, and every person standing outside looking in deserves someone to hand them a golden card and say, "This is for you." The ripple effects of a single golden card extend far beyond the walls of the literary haven, creating a network of transformed lives that spans generations and continents. What began as one woman's memory of childhood hunger for stories has evolved into a movement that challenges our understanding of how small acts of kindness can reshape entire communities. 5 years after receiving her golden card, Zelphina graduated summa cum laude from the State University with a degree in creative writing and social work. Her senior thesis, The Golden Thread: How Literary Access Transforms Communities, became the foundation for a non-profit organization that would eventually establish reading programs in over 50 cities across the nation. But the real magic happened in the spaces between the statistics, in the individual moments when one person's belief in another's potential created exponential change. Marcus, the 10-year-old boy Zelphina had mentored, grew up to become a pediatric doctor who established mobile libraries in underserved communities. His younger sister, inspired by his transformation, founded a program that trains teenagers to become literacy advocates in their own neighborhoods. Each person touched by the Golden Card Initiative didn't just receive help. They became multipliers, creating their own networks of support and opportunity. Research conducted by Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuroscientist at Stanford University, who had herself been a recipient of Evangelizing program 20 years earlier, revealed the profound neurological impact of consistent access to literature during adolescence. Her studies showed that teenagers who read regularly during their formative years developed enhanced empathy, improved critical thinking skills, and stronger emotional regulation capabilities that persisted well into adulthood. The data was compelling, but the human stories behind the numbers were even more powerful. Brain scans of former Golden Card recipients showed increased activity in regions associated with creativity, problem-solving, and social cognition. These young people weren't just reading books. They were literally rewiring their brains for success, resilience, and compassion. The Golden Card concept transcended cultural boundaries when Maria Santos, a former recipient who had become an international development worker, adapted the program for communities in rural Guatemala. Working with local artisans, she created beautiful wooden tokens that granted access to traveling libraries and storytelling circles. The program flourished, with indigenous grandmothers sharing traditional tales alongside classic literature, creating a bridge between ancestral wisdom and contemporary knowledge. In Mumbai, former recipient Arjun Patel established digital golden cards that provided access to ebooks and online learning platforms for children living in slums. His innovation reached thousands of young people who had never owned a physical book but could access entire libraries through donated tablets and smartphones. The program's success caught the attention of tech companies, who began donating resources and expertise to expand digital literacy initiatives worldwide. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of the Golden Card legacy was its impact on the givers themselves. Evangeline, now in her 80s, found her own life enriched beyond measure by the connections she had fostered. Her foundation's annual reunion brought together hundreds of former recipients, creating a chosen family bound by shared experiences of transformation and gratitude. The bookstore owners who participated in the program reported increased community engagement and loyalty. Many expanded their spaces to include tutoring areas, writing workshops, and community meeting rooms. The literary haven itself became a model for community-centered bookstores, with business schools studying its approach to social entrepreneurship Not everyone embraced the Golden Card initiative without reservation. Some critics argued that the program created dependency rather than self-reliance, that it was merely a band-aid on systemic issues of poverty and educational inequality. These concerns led to important conversations about the difference between charity and empowerment, ultimately strengthening the program's focus on mentorship and skill building, rather than simple resource distribution. The foundation faced practical challenges as well. As demand grew, maintaining the personal touch that made the program effective became increasingly difficult. This led to the development of a sophisticated matching system that paired recipients with mentors based on interests, career goals, and personality compatibility. The technology enabled scale while preserving the human connections that made transformation possible. Today, many of the original Golden Card recipients hold leadership positions within the foundation itself. They bring fresh perspectives and innovative approaches to reaching young people in an increasingly digital world. Social media campaigns featuring recipient success stories inspire new donors and volunteers, while virtual reality experiences allow potential supporters to literally see the world through the eyes of a child standing outside a bookstore window. The program has evolved to address modern challenges, including mental health support, digital literacy, and climate change education. But at its core, it remains true to Evangeline's original vision, recognizing potential in young people and providing them with the tools and support they need to transform their own lives and communities. As this narrative concludes, thousands of new Golden Cards are being distributed around the world. Each one carries the same promise that Evangeline made to Zelphina on that rainy afternoon, that stories have the power to change lives, that every person deserves access to knowledge and opportunity, and that the most profound transformations often begin with the simplest acts of recognition and kindness. The Golden Card has become more than a symbol. It's a movement, a philosophy, a reminder that we all have the power to be someone else's Evangeline, someone else's turning point, someone else's reason to believe that their story matters and their dreams are worth pursuing.